Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Espresso with Carlo. We are really excited. This series has taken on a life of its own. People seem really excited about coming together weekly and hearing from some interesting guests. We have some exciting guests in the month of July, which I am not allowed to talk about yet. But I will just tease a little bit that towards the third week of July, we will have probably one of the most influential figures in the United States join me for Espresso with Carlo. And the person is actually somebody that I think there is agreement that everybody respects, whether you are on the right or the left or the middle. So announcement to follow soon. But today we have two stellar individuals in the building industry, both who serve on the executive committee of the Building Congress. Obviously our chair, Elizabeth Velez, president of Velez organization, and Cheryl McKissack, the president and CEO of McKissack and McKissack. And I think, I don't need to really set this up, Liz and Cheryl. Obviously, we have, I think, turned the corner in America in the last couple of weeks. Although, as somebody said, nothing has changed if you're part of those communities, because this has been going on for obviously hundreds of years. The only thing that's changed is we're videotaping them and we're seeing it. And that's been out there more and more. I think, look, we are clearly not going to solve the issues of race and impact and diversity and inclusion across the country on every level, whether it's the police, whether it's private industry, whether it's government, et cetera. But I think we can solve, or at least be ready to challenge ourselves and ask the hard questions about the building industry and where we are, where we go from this, and what do we do next. And when we were putting together this discussion, obviously both of you came to mind as individuals who have really led the charge on inclusion and diversity. Individuals who have been successful in your own companies, but I imagine with many bumps in the roads, challenges, and I would imagine a couple of doors shut in your face here and there. So I think hearing from both of you a little bit about maybe your thoughts on where we are today, but more importantly, helping to guide us to a plan. I think the one thing we've all agreed on is the days of doing reports and surveys. Those days have long passed. We know what the problem is. We've identified the issue. In many ways, the building industry has come a long way. Obviously, we put out a workforce snapshot a few months ago. The industry, particularly working men and women in the trades, are over 60% non-white. So you have more Black and Latino participation. We still have challenges with women in the industry. And then the bigger challenge is, I think, twofold, is really growing Blacks, Latinos, people of color, and women to real significant leadership positions in the top companies in the building industry, and then growing the MWBE companies and seeing them work. So with that, Liz and Cheryl, maybe give us some initial thoughts and then we'll take questions. Liz, I'm gonna turn to you as chair to start us off.
Thank you. So thank you so much. And Carlo, I'm thrilled that we're having this kind of this discussion on diversity and inclusion. It's one whose time has come. It's one whose time has been. But one thing that this awful coronavirus, this awful crisis has revealed is the disparity between certain communities and others. It has peeled back a layer and shown that really this coronavirus has taken its impact on those communities whose health and wealth are at a lesser area. And so if we can go and look at Corona, as well as what's happening from a social justice perspective to kind of change the paradigm, we know that increasing diversity and inclusion certainly would better competition within our industry, within the state and within New York City. We know that it elevates all of our communities, especially those harder hit, because our industry is wonderful about hiring from within our communities. We also know that it kind of supports job retention and satisfaction with employees within when we have more diverse workforces. And then perhaps most importantly, for a lot of the folks that are on this call, it increases return on investment. So that's been shown time and time again in study after study, that if we go and change our policies to be more progressive and inclusive, we actually see the returns, the dividends being paid, not only in the jobs that we get awarded as contractors and architects and engineers, but also within the return on investment through job retention and satisfaction. So this is a conversation whose time is now.
Cheryl?
Sorry about that. I should know how to do this really well now.
Exactly.
Yes, Carlo, I am just thrilled and excited that you decided to have Espresso with Coffee and Carlo to speak about racial inequality and what is going on in America today. It's so important for us to open up and have this discussion. And I always like to steal a line from Michael Jackson, that it all starts with a man in the mirror changing his own ways, because biases are across the line. Racial reconciliation in this country has been on the back burner with respect to Black and brown people for centuries. And so, you know, we've gone to where no one really cared, to maybe modern day where people say it just doesn't exist. Right. But now we know that it does exist after we've seen what's happened and unfolded over the last month or so. But I am extremely encouraged to see the diversity in the young protesters who are calling out for freedom and justice. And, you know, they are saying discrimination against any one person is discrimination and can hurt all of us. So that is encouraging. You know, it's like, just because something doesn't affect you doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. You know, I'm sure in the Jewish community, the Jewish people have to deal with anti-Semitism, and how do they discuss that in their homes? I'm sure there are discussions on what they do. I just want to say in the Black community, there is always a discussion. I can't think of one parent that I know that does not talk to their Black daughter or son about what to do when they're stopped by the police, because invariably that's going to happen, and more so to Black males. There is not one Black male I know that hasn't been stopped by 2 or 3 times in their lifetime, even in their professional years of their life. So this is a reality that I'm glad we are bringing to light. But how does all of this affect the building Congress, the AEC community, and what can we do to really bring about change? And that's what I'm glad we're going to talk about today. I just want to start by saying that my perspective is from a Black woman who's now running a 5th generation Black company. All my predecessors were Black men who have overcome slavery, the lynchings of Jim Crow, and civil rights movement. So what does that say? That does say that Black and brown companies can achieve in spite of all the odds, in spite of all of the social and economic ills. But if we were to remove all of those things, where would our country really be? So I am glad that we are sitting here talking with our peers. We're attacking the elephants in the room. And I want my peers to know that this change doesn't start with Liz and I. All we can do is bring it to everyone's attention, but a lot of the change is going to come from the people who are listening to us right now. And so thank you for showing up today to hear what we have to say.
That's great. You know, it is interesting that you say that every Black male you know has been stopped at some point. And parents have to have a different discussion with their children, Black or brown, than I would have to have with my child. And that is just the reality of living in America today, but it's really been the reality of living in America for a long time.
Exactly.
You know, a couple of things that have, and before we talk about some of the changes, and I have a question from one of our listeners, which I think is a fundamental question, and I'm going to ask it in a minute. But, you know, Cheryl, I believe you were involved in building Atlantic Yards and the Barclays. I feel like you had part of that contract to do something there. It is striking to me to see, as a Brooklynite, the center of the movement in Brooklyn, at least, is centered around the Barclays Center Plaza. And the reason I bring that up is because I was at Borough Hall during the time of the building of Barclays, and we went through so much heartache and people beating us up. And it was really the Black community from the communities surrounding what is now Atlantic Yards who were the most vocal supporters of Barclays. And it was because one was we had really planned and hoped, and I think we did a decent job, to provide construction work to particularly young Black men in the zip codes around there, and women also, but in reality, it was mainly young Black men who pursued those jobs. Jay-Z and Beyonce and a basketball stadium and all that. But the reason I bring it up most importantly is because I've always said, when I have stood at the Barclays Center, all you really have to do is walk 25 blocks in every direction of Barclays to see the contrast of American life. Some of the greatest wealth in America is on one side of the Barclays Center. And, you know, where you're selling brownstones for $3 million, et cetera. And yet some of the greatest poverty of Blacks, Latinos as well, but mainly Blacks, is on the other side of that. And to see, and Cheryl, I think you picked it up, the diversity of the people protesting. When I look at it at Barclays, it's, well, we've now brought those four corners together. Wow. And now what? And it goes back to the question of now, what do we do to harness this excitement, this energy in our building community? And I'm going to ask this first question because I think it's brilliant. I don't know who wrote it, but whoever did, thank you. And I'm going to read it verbatim. I usually don't. One of my main concerns, excuse me, as someone who is in the younger workforce and hoping to rise in the ranks in the future, is that I currently don't see many Blacks or minorities in the C-suite level. How can we, as the workforce of the future, work to help promote change and diversity and inclusion in the C-suite? And I think that's something we've spoken about. Liz, you and I spoke about it about an hour ago.
So Carlo, I'm so glad you brought up Barclay and Atlantic Avenue, because that was an example, one of several good examples of when leadership is willing and diversity programs are intentional, you actually can see some movement. And it's also an example of if we do not keep our foot on the gas with diversity and inclusion programs, procurement opportunities for all, the ability for especially minority and women-owned businesses to elevate and grow, then if we don't keep our foot on the gas, then we're going to see us atrophying and snapping back. So I'm glad you brought that project up, because it really was a good example of how leadership came together, minds came on the same line, planets were aligned, and we were able to see some real movement, real inclusion, and real benefit to some of the communities. that were affected. I love the question about the C-suite. One of the things that we're seeing now on some procurements from New York State is a question being asked in an RFP. What does your ethnic makeup look like? What are the demographics of your upper management? And it's actually a question being used in procurement opportunities. And it asks for what the diversity is. And it is a margin of the ability to score in many instances. We're seeing this now, a winning proposal. And so that goes right to the essence of it, right? We need leadership. We need, and I think Governor Cuomo has done a phenomenal job of putting diversity and inclusion issues in state procurement to the forefront. When we ask questions, it's not just a nice question on an RFP response. It is saying, who does make up your upper management? Because we know leadership can make that change.
And so, Carlo, I love the Atlantic Yards project. It started with a movement from the community, the leadership, the development under Bruce Ratner. Bruce was always committed to MWBE, and it wasn't the window type. It was more of, we need real MWBE participation. We want to build capacity. We want to help the companies who we think need help. And we were actually able to secure a prime role on that project. Oh God, I don't know how long ago, 2007. And
yeah, I remember sitting in Borough Hall. I didn't know who Cheryl was. Obviously, now we work closely together. But I remember Bruce and Marianne talking about your company.
Yeah, and so it was a game changer for our company, and we need more of that. We need more game-changing opportunities, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. The question that was posed is a very good question, and it really does go back to why diversity matters. I think Liz mentioned earlier, diversity matters, one, because you can secure a better talent pool because of the people you have in your office. So if you are a young minority person and you look at a company that doesn't have anybody that looks like you, you don't want to go there. And although you bring a lot of value and a lot of talent, you don't want to go there. So I think when we talk about inclusion, we need to understand that it means value, that people are bringing value to the table, even though they look different. And so the tendency usually is to hire what's comfortable, what's familiar, what's similar. And we have to start looking at that differently and say, okay, no, we want what's different and what's diverse. And as Liz said, that has to be intentional. That is not something that is easy. I know in our company, for many years in our C-suite, there were people that did not look like me. And the minority, brown and Black people that did look like me brought that to my attention. Like, Cheryl, what is going on here? So I had to be intentional in going out to find the qualified people that fit our culture, who were going to come in and lead my company. And now the leadership of my company has changed tremendously. And it's over 60% minority and female. And so, that's what it takes. You have to lead with empathy. You have to look around and really say, I want to do something that is different than what I've done before. And I really understand what people are going through. And I'm not just going to bring them to my company because they're different. I'm going to bring them in. I'm really going to include them in every meeting, in every decision, in every opportunity. And I think that right there gives young people who are coming up through the ranks someone to look up to and a position that they think that they feel that they can obtain.
I think, Cheryl, it's interesting. So you're a Black woman that owns, as you said, a generational company, and even you had to step back and focus on, what am I doing here? What's wrong? So I think we're all in this, you know, it's interesting.
We're in it
We're
together.
all in this
Yes.
together. You know, I'm looking at the people who have joined us, and some of the greatest minds in our industry, some of our board members, Maureen Hennigan and Tom Scarangello and a bunch of other people.
Love it.
And I think we all need to come together and say, what are we doing? How does it work next? You know, Tom and a couple of others started many years ago the Innovation and Best Practices Council for the Building Congress. Now it's evolved and gotten bigger, and we're kicking off our web series on our innovation conference called Ascend, since we can't be in person. But I think best practices has to include inclusion. And what are we doing as an industry moving forward, not just in technology and innovation, but to me, innovation is also getting a diverse, interesting, different workforce to come together, one that reflects who we are as a society. And I think that's important.
You know,
Liz?
Carlo, one of our members, FX Collaborative, an architecture firm, realized that they saw the benefit and the value of diversity and inclusion. And they wanted it on a very granular level. They wanted to change the paradigm with the interns that come in. So we all know that internship opportunities for our young people coming into our industries is one of the first glimpses that they have of our industry, especially here in New York. And so FX Collaborative did something that I think is great and worth sharing. For their internship program, the head of HR took away all of the identifying characteristics of every applicant. They get hundreds of applicants in for their internship program. So they removed the name, they removed the address, they removed where that person went to school to kind of create a level playing field by covering up some of those identifiers. What happens is, I think is phenomenal, and they're looking forward to doing this again and again. 88% of the interns that were ultimately came into their program, they also, by the way, changed up the selection committee to be more diverse as well. So by removing all the identifiers that you would traditionally have, they had 88% of their interns coming in were from ethnic diverse communities, Black and Latino communities. And they did that all just by covering up those identifiers. So it shows that with good leadership, we can really start making changes in who comes in our door, but also who is operating from the top. Terrific example.
I love it. And actually, my staff that's on will appreciate this. They've done that with me now as we're hiring. We're not that big of an organization in terms of staff, but they started doing that. No name, no address, just these are my qualifications. I keep asking, but I want to know where they went to school. You're not allowed to know, you know. But again, as the person making the final decision, it's almost like I'm Italian and you tie my hands, I have to shut up because I talk like this. Same thing when you want to know, do they know somebody? Did we go to the same school? You can't know anything. You know, we every year we work with a group called Cristo Rey. It's a school in Brooklyn. You may remember Bob Cattell, who was the CEO of Brooklyn Union Gas for many years. He actually was on I believe he was on the Building Congress board at one point. He is a true philanthropist, and he started this school. He chairs the board there. It is 100% students of color, Black and Latino. And what they have to do is, as part of their education, they have to work 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is, in an office. They have to get dressed. They have to interview. They have to, you know, generally they work in clerical because they're still in high school. And we've had many students come through this program, both when I was at the Chamber and now at the Building Congress. And the thing that has struck me is these are incredibly talented, smart young people. Most come from a housing project in Brooklyn who know nothing about architecture, engineering, or construction jobs other than they see contractors working in the street. But they don't even know that there's more to construction than what you just see on a site. I think we would all agree that our biggest challenge is starting in kindergarten and getting these kids excited about these careers. I look at my daughter who's 5 years old. She's already told everybody she wants to be an architect because she likes to build and she wants to design and she's good at drawing and this and that. And I say to myself, she knows about this because her father is in this world, because there are kids in her class whose parents are in, who's an engineer, who's an architect, who's a construction. Most children don't have that. What do we need to do really to change that dynamic so that when Manhattan College or Pratt or any university 15 years from now is graduating a class, we are looking at that audience and saying, wow, look at these young girls, young boys who are Black and Latino. They came through. Now they're ready to go work in the big leagues. What do we need to do?
Well, we're all on, all of us, right? Cheryl, Carlo, and I all serve on the ACE Mentorship of New York board. And that's a phenomenal program. I love talking about it as much as I can because it identifies kids that are in high school to pipe them into not only the STEM fields, but architecture, engineering, and construction, and coming in under the internships that ACE does provide. You're absolutely right, Carlo. When my father came here from Puerto Rico as a young kid, he didn't know anything about construction until he was brought by the hands to a union hall and joined as a carpenters union. That trajectory changed his life and obviously my life too, with regard to building in New York. So we have to start on a very granular level in the high schools and even in the middle schools to be able to show them what an inclusive workforce is, but also that careers in architecture, engineering, and construction are careers that you can raise a family on and be inclusive.
Yeah, it starts at an early age. You know, because this has been a part of my family for so long, I started walking construction sites at 7 or 8 years old and began working in my father's architectural firm when I was 12. And so, you know, that made all the difference in, you know, my desires as to what I would be when I became a professional. So the role models plays a very important role. But it also starts very early. If you look at statistics, you know, in first grade, you will have Black men at the front of the class. By the time they get to fourth grade, they're in the back of the class. And it has a lot to do with what they're told, what they see and experience while in that class. They raise their hands, they don't get called on, they're told they can't achieve. And so the dialogue has to change because people believe, you know, what they can achieve a lot of times by what other people tell them. And, you know, at that age, you haven't become an adult and understand that mostly everything you need in life comes from within. You hear it from some type of external source. Just this morning on TV, I saw with a CBS Today, a little kid in his yard playing basketball. And when he saw the police, he ran and hid behind the car.
I saw that this morning.
Yeah, he told his father he's afraid of police because of what he's seen on TV. So, you know, it's all these images that we need to change and deal with.
Great.
It's also yeah, go ahead, Carlo.
Go ahead. I have another question that I thought was interesting.
Pivoting, how do we go and engage our young people from our more economically challenged communities? How do we engage our minority and our young girls even too, is by supporting also the minority and women-owned businesses that hire them. And so we've got some great programs within New York State and New York City. By the way, essential programs, because disparity studies have shown that there is a difference between non-minority companies and in terms of getting the work. So if we can change the conversation to also be supportive of minority and women-owned businesses that hire from within our communities and supporting them, we've got good programs. We need to enhance those programs, both with the city and New York State. We've seen a great movement when there have been chief diversity officers appointed throughout the city and throughout the state. We've seen great movement when advisory boards advise agencies. We talk about leadership and changing and moving the needle. We can change that paradigm by supporting those programs. And again, like I said earlier, increases competition and inclusion. And so if we really want our young children to come into our industry, they need to know that they can come into also a organization that looks like them.
Right.
And you know what, Liz, I just want to piggyback on a couple of the comments you made, including the intern program that Fox and Fowl instituted, where they did not show the ethnicity or gender of the applicants. You know, there's a show on TV called Love is Blind, and that was the same situation. Wouldn't it be great if we could do that when it comes to proposals? I often tell the story of my grandfather and his brother, who had been in business for 15, 20 years before architectural licensing laws came into effect. And they had to get their license in order to continue business. So if you can imagine two Black men in Tennessee going to, you know, the establishment to get architectural license, they were told no over and over and over again, until they solicited a white board member who told the rest of the board, we can't stop these men just because they're Black. They're not going to pass the test anyway. They take the test, they pass, and now they have to fight to get their actual license. So I say that story in that we have to recognize that that same mindset that happened in the early 1920s still exists in some of our government agencies and private corporations. And so we need to root a lot of that out if we want minority businesses to excel and really have a level playing field.
I agree. You know, I think one of the things we're hearing in some of the questions, one of them, and Liz, I know you've worked on 15A for a while. You know, so 15A is really geared towards companies that are owned by women and minorities. But one of the questions we have today, and I've actually gotten this question from some of our members, is what about a larger firm whose workforce is 70% women and minority? Under 15A, they don't get any credit or anything. How do we, is there a way of changing that or creating something that would give even more incentive for a larger firm to hire women and minorities at the top of the chain?
Well, we have to understand.
That's what we're saying a little bit. Go ahead, Cheryl. Go ahead.
Liz, I'm sorry that I cut you off there. I just want to bring up one point that, you know, the MWBE program is not a social program. It's an economic program. And so we have to be careful about who owns companies because we're trying to shift a paradigm with respect to ownership too, which allows Black and Latino business owners to control their own destiny. So while a white firm could have 70% workforce, let's look at Amazon. That's probably Amazon. That's probably FedEx. I
probably
don't know.
Walmart.
It could be Walmart.
Probably Walmart, right?
It's still a very powerful, wealthy company. And so does that really move the needle with respect to Black and Latino firms?
Right. Liz, you want to add anything to that?
No, it's to Cheryl's point, and well said, Cheryl. Is entrepreneurship is the real support for the Black, the minority, and women business community. I think both those are important, though. I think it's important to have a diverse workforce. I absolutely think it's important to have a diverse management, the C-suite level, in all firms. And we should continue our discussions on how we can go about doing that, to be able to win work and even under Article 15A, which is a great program and an essential one for business development.
Right.
Yeah, and I encourage firms to increase their Black and Latino and female and LGBTQ workers or employees. It's only going to make those firms more attractive to future customers.
That's right.
Great. I think there are a couple of moving pieces here. So there's the longer term, how are we solving the crisis in early childhood education and instilling a love or an understanding of design and architecture and engineering and construction to children in elementary, middle school, and high school. Obviously, that's a 12-year. We wanna do some solving today. So, in your minds, put aside that there is a long-term plan that we will have to recognize, and put aside that we're done with studies and reports.
Yes.
What should we be doing now? Like, what do we need to do today and tomorrow to reflect inclusion in our industry? Or where there is inclusion, how do we bring that out more and build from there? What do we need to do now? What is one or two things?
I think we need to continue to develop our industry, and even with an MWBE guide, I should say, kind of develop even by sector. We can do it by energy, housing, transportation, health, and education. Really focus on that. We should incentivize joint ventures. I have to tell you, in the 80s, we participated in a number of joint ventures, real joint ventures, substantive partnerships between, for us, it was with HRH Construction. That helped us change our dynamic and our paradigm so much. We were doing work for the Housing Authority, for Health and Hospitals Corporation, with our prime partner, HRH, and it was substantive. It was a 60-40 real joint venture that really helped build us along and bring us, by the way, into construction management in a real and meaningful way. So the lessons learned with JVs are there. A lot of the procurements actually support essential joint ventures. And I think we need to engage the private sector as well. They're there. I think everyone sees this. It's more than just goodwill. It's about increasing the bottom line. And with diversity and inclusion, they can do that. Those are just some of many thoughts that we can do, Carlo, in the short term and even in the longer term. We talked about FX Collaborative and their wonderful experiment that turned into a terrific diversity and inclusion tool. But, the NFL also has the Rooney Rule. And we might look at that towards even developing our C-suite executives, ensuring, making a measured response to be able to include minority and women in the candidates for high-level positions within organizations, and by the way, also within our public agencies as well.
Cheryl?
Okay, Liz, I think that's terrific. The JV suggestion is awesome. I often say that the MWBE program should not just be the onus of the government. It should definitely be the onus of all sectors that are part of the AEC community. So that would include the private sector. And so to that point, there are a few companies out there in our arena, Liz and I's arena, which are CMs, that impose and have policies for MWBE requirements on every single one of their projects, even if it's not required. And I think that is so important when you look at cultural projects and private projects in New York City today. Why why should companies only bring on MWBE support when it's required? It should be all the time, especially when those companies have worked with MWBE firms that, you know, they have a relationship with. And I think that would help tremendously in increasing the number of MWBEs and helping them grow. And
I love that idea, by the way.
Oh, good, good.
I love that idea.
I won't say the companies that have those policies, but I love you.
Good.
Yeah, that's right. There's also mentor programs, right? And New York State and New York City have two of the best mentor programs, with the School Construction Authority's mentor program under our wonderful Lorraine Grillo, and the MTA's mentor program. Those are phenomenal ways to bring in firms and be able to build their capacity and weave them into the fabric of construction. I believe that there's also tremendous opportunities under a mentor program kind of guideline for architecture and engineering firms too. We shouldn't forget about all aspects of our industry.
Yes.
And I think as we pull together a group of individuals across the industry, and you know, I think one of the best things that the Building Congress does is really bring people together. And I think it's time that we brought together a real group of individuals to start thinking about the immediate next steps, the long-term steps, create a set of guiding principles that we believe are important for our industry. Cheryl, I think what you said is everybody should be participating in MWBE programs, whether you have to or not. It's the right thing to do. And I think we can learn from many of these things. And again, I think we've heard this from everybody, including both of you. It can't just be people who are Black and brown on a task force. It has to be white men and white women and Black men, et cetera. It's got to be a group of people who can make decisions and help bring about change in the industry. And I think one of the things that we're excited to do. Someone asked, why do companies only meet government requirements for MWBE? Why are others not doing it if they're not required?
I think it's just economics. Even when required, sometimes we see firms, and I'm just going to use this as an example because it's not my line of business. So say an architectural firm is required to bring on 30% MWBE. They try and do most of that in the building trades. I see that happen a lot. Not all firms, but you see that a lot. And, you know, that's great. But where can you impact the most difference is where I make the biggest impact. And that is bringing on an MWBE in your own trade. Because at that point, you become a mentor. And so we need to see it that way. And we also don't need to see it as a chore. We need to see this as a collaborative way to bring about a better project. You know, as Liz talked about jointers, I think they are terrific. But oftentimes, McKissack is invisible. And I mean, we go to meetings and the client will mention our joint venture partner throughout the meeting and not say the company, my joint venture partner and McKissack. Although my partner is saying their name and McKissack, although everybody in the room is saying it, my client doesn't say it.
Right.
And, you know, no one really notices that but me, but it sends a message. It sends a message to everyone that what McKissack is bringing to this project isn't important to my client. And so we need to deal with these, you know, perceptions and the language. We need to look at not what we do consciously, is what we do subconsciously.
Absolutely.
I agree. I think, hold on, we have another good question. Any suggestions on how to moderate, reconcile subtle interpersonal dynamics issue within the office, resulting from unconscious bias or misunderstanding of each other. And have you seen that, by the way, in your offices at all?
I go for it dead on.
Really?
Right.
Cheryl, I would be surprised if you didn't.
Cards on the table. And, you know, I understand that there are biases all around the room. We all have them. Mm-hmm. But there are things we tolerate at our company, and there are things we don't tolerate. And, you know, that's how I deal with that. I mean, some of the times, you know, the difference in that discussion right there can shift a mindset in a positive direction. And so if you are the manager that has that situation, you really need to think strong and hard about how you're going to deal with it. And it starts with your internal, what you think, and how you perceive things. And, you know, it's uncomfortable to talk about, but you have to be comfortable to say, okay, there are Black, white issues. There are Latino, Black issues. You have to just put it out there.
That's right.
I agree.
Right.
I think
and you have to have an open,
honest discussions, open discussions.
Oh, yeah. And an open door policy too. Anyone, I know that in our firm, anyone feels very comfortable coming directly to me to talk one-on-one. And that is essential to be able to have the employees feel like they have a place to go and be heard. And then the other thing is within an organization, you can develop employee resource groups to focus on support for different areas within your employment. You can have a women's group. You can have a Latino group. You can have a Black group. And that creates a terrific environment for people to share, be more upfront, and also create more of a cultural awareness within the firm.
You know, it's interesting you say that. When I was in law school, no surprise, I was president of the Italian American whatever lawyers group at ACE. There was a Black American, or a Black student lawyers group also. And I decided we should do like Mixer together and go out for drinks with the group. People like, why? And then it became cool. And they were like, well, isn't there a Latino group too? Let's bring them on. And then it became like, well, why are we all doing our own things? This is fun when we're out drinking, and I won't repeat other things that went on in the days of law school. But you know, so Liz, you're right. You're able to have these groups, and then they come together, and it's all wonderful. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
so we have a couple of minutes. Go ahead.
There's diversity education. I mean, that's you know, you can bring in professionals to give seminars just around diversity, and the psychological transformation that is happening today. I mean, that's worth me having a professional come in and speak to my company about.
Right.
You know, Dick Anderson, obviously, who led the Building Congress for many years, just made a comment in the Q&A, and I think it's right. I know it's how I live in my job. Should we be thinking inclusion in everything we do day to day in our industry, and really focus on being inclusive in all aspects of what we do? And I think that's important.
Absolutely. It's essential.
We have a couple of minutes left. Final thoughts, next steps. Obviously, we're going to be creating a group of people that is going to come up with immediate solutions and long-term solutions, and implementation of next steps, which obviously is critical. What's your advice to people listening in today, both of you?
Oh, there's so much advice to be given. There's so much thoughts to be given, and a collaborative. This is a terrific opportunity for us to really collaborate and speak to one another openly and honestly about moving the needle. You know, the construction industry makes up about 6% of the American economy. And so the benefits that affect us all by being more inclusive, diversity and inclusion would resonate just throughout our entire United States. We need to get rid of a lot of we need to standardize a lot of the programs and procedures for moving forward. It's very hard in our industry somehow to read you need a Rosetta Stone sometimes to figure out what exactly is being required. Let's throw that all out and kind of restart with a real inclusive kind of platform to be able to have these programs apply across the board in the public sector and in the private sector, and have the private sector embrace it, to be able to have inclusion. The reality is unless we kind of mandate percentages, at least for the time being, until it becomes a part of our DNA, unless we mandate kind of percentages of inclusion, we're not going to be seeing any real changes anytime soon. The reality is we haven't seen it, right? We haven't seen it to date. So if we start, I think, bold and look at taking our larger size firm and making them bigger, our middle size MWBE firms and making them bigger, not only focus on the small firms that are coming in, those small entrepreneurs. There are many things that we can do to break down projects that incentivize MWBEs to be able to perform and target, by the way, MWBE inclusion.
Yes, thank you, Liz. I agree with all your points. I really have one point, and Carlo, I commend you for wanting to respond to this in some way and creating a committee around this and making Liz and I co-chairs of that committee. But earlier in my discussions, I talked about, this is great to be among my peers, but a lot of this change is going to come from our peers. So yes. I would like to encourage everybody who's listening today to participate with Liz and I on this committee. We really need to hear from you about your experiences, what your questions are. Also, I would like to offer, I am available to speak to anyone. I had one person in the construction industry email me and say, Cheryl, I just want to have a frank conversation. I really want to know what this feels like. I want to tell you what I'm thinking. And I don't want there to be any barriers in this conversation. I am here for that. And I think Liz is too. I would welcome that. Those who know me, they know I am straightforward and direct. And I love attacking.
That's why we get along, Cheryl.
I love attacking the elephants in the room. So, I hope.
No, I think we lost her.
Oh, I think, and she was saying, I hope.
She was really saying, no, there she is.
I agree.
I hope someone's knocked on my door. I have construction work going on. I have all these things. Anyway, so I just hope we can all work together to really bring about change through the building Congress. It's all up to us.
That's what we're here for. And that's what we're here for. So a couple of just comments, I think when people heard about this committee, all of a sudden there's 30 questions. Yes, we will be including our young professionals. Because if you look at our Young Professionals Committee, it's an exciting, inclusion, diverse group, right? So that's great. So yes, we will include them. It's going to be open to everyone. We've asked, obviously, Liz and Cheryl to co-chair it. I think they bring very valuable insight, but it's open to anyone. And most importantly, we're going to reach out to some of our leaders in the industry to be part of this, because this has got to be much bigger than just us. It's got to be really something that is bold, is honest, and hopefully will set some guiding principles and some immediate action items that people will be excited about across the city. I think that's important. And I think we have a lot of work to do. I think the most important thing, and I think both Liz and Cheryl and myself, obviously, we are very blunt people. And we're not afraid to talk about issues. And that doesn't make us great or not great. It just makes us real. New Yorkers are not people who fear discussion. And if anything is going to get done in this country, it's got to start in New York, because that's who we are. We get things done. Two quick things that I'm as I'm talking to you all, I'm following Twitter and what's going on. Of course, the governor just announced 10 minutes ago, that Juneteenth will become a state holiday.
Right.
Good.
Immediately. And the White House is preparing a $1 trillion infrastructure proposal.
Oh, awesome.
To spur the economy. So I get chills when I hear $1 trillion in infrastructure. And it will obviously make our DC lobbying and advocacy in the fall even more important. And one final thing, there are many groups out there that are doing incredible things, and I won't name them, but women's groups, et cetera. We're going to be including them as part of this group that we're putting together, because this is not just about inclusion in the industry, it's about inclusion of us. And the more people and organizations that we can hear from and understand, I think the better this will be. I am committed to it. I think, particularly as the Building Congress enters into 2021, our 100th anniversary, a centennial. Boy, imagine if we leave that centennial year having really put out initiatives, structure, plans, ideas, and items that have worked to help lead us to the next 100 years. To me, that's a successful. And yesterday we had a short meeting internally about what does a centennial look like today, as opposed to what we thought it would look like 4 months ago. Right. And to me, it's not just about parties anymore. It's about revolutionizing and moving forward the industry for the next 100 years. And those are great conversations. So with that, I thank you both, Elizabeth Velez
thank you.
and Carlo McKissack. Thank you for all that you do. And thank you to all of you. We will see you next week for Espresso with Carlo. Have a great day, everyone.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.